Well, Brian, you know,
Okay, I didn't know if we were hooked up with your brothers yet.
yep, they're all there. They're all
Oh.
looking at you.
Yeah, we're all here.
I'm sorry. Well, I'm Brian, and this is my wife Kathy of 34 years and 2 sons. And I just felt compelled to talk to your mother originally. And then she wanted me to talk to you folks because you don't remember anything about my relationship with your dad, I'm sure. And I have to admit, I didn't even think initially that I was going to have to tell you this. And I really hate to, but I have the bad news first. Don't despair. We're going to go on to some really good news. Okay. And I'll probably get emotional a couple of times at least, because there's something about my age that does that. I don't know what it is, but in 2005, the cornea transplant that was on my right eye just basically wore out, and it was the only eye I had. And it was replaced by Dr. Verdier in Grand Rapids. And shortly after that, it was going fairly well. And then I had a detached retina, which took 2 surgeries to repair that. And then the pressure in that eye dropped so low that I lost the vision in it. This was, well, over a year and a half's time I did. So by about 2006. And I've been blind since then. What I want to get across to you right now, and then I'll give you the details. And again, don't despair. This isn't going to take all day, but if it had not been for Stephen Palmer and Dr. Klaus Dolman at Mass Eye and Ear in Boston, I would not have gone blind in 2005. I would have gone blind in 1974. Okay. And
Wow.
I wish that I had expressed more of these things to your dad, although he knew all the details, believe me. But just how I felt about the whole thing. So I don't know if any of you ever looked in the archives of the Grand Rapids Press at what happened to me. It was fall of 1974. I worked at Robinette Orchards, which was just northeast of Grand Rapids. Turns out I was a production manager. I never had a title until the story hit the Grand Rapids Press. Somebody read to me later, oh, it says Brian Trapp, production manager. So anyway, and I have to say this because a couple times through the years, somebody who wasn't very familiar with the story said, well, why were you working with explosives? Or even why were you monkeying with explosives? And I was doing neither one, I guarantee you. Some young people had access to explosives, wanted to destroy property at Robinette's. They did not know the Robinette's. They did not know me. This was a prank. I've gotten in trouble for saying that word a couple times because it's like, that's no prank, you know, you don't blow things up. And I understand that, believe me. But they set a bomb consisting of 2 sticks of dynamite, blasting caps, timer, got back far enough to watch the fun, and it did not go off. Okay. Rather than call anybody, they decided they would just get out of the area. So next morning I get to work, I'm doing my normal job. A friend of the Robinette says, Brian, what's in this box over here? I said, I have no idea. As we approached it, I was estimated to be about 6 feet away. It detonated. So we were both seriously injured. They took what was left of us to Blodgett, where 3 different surgeons worked on me. over the next few days, one of them being your dad. And he did several surgeries on me. I can't even tell you, are any of you doctors by any chance?
So Dad's Sandy Palmer's second son is a nurse practitioner, and then I am the wife of the fourth son, and I'm a PA. So,
Oh, okay.
and I worked,
Well,
and I actually worked for Dad for about 3 or 4 months.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you what the names of the surgeries were. I know he did reconstructive surgery, cleaned out my eyes, removed cataracts, did some glaucoma work, various things. There was, to the best of my recollection, like 6 of them. That was not counting what they had to do to my legs. My eardrums were gone. They got those things on the way to healing, and but I had no sight in either eye. I remember asking Dr. Palmer, he was in the hospital every day to examine me and talk to me. And I remember him saying several times, Brian, eyes heal very slowly. I even asked him one day, am I ever going to see again? And he said, remember, eyes heal slowly. We're not giving up on it. So at one point, about, I'm going to say February, keep in mind the accident was, well, it was the 19th of October in 74. About February, he had referred me to a retina specialist in Grand Rapids to see if something could be done with my left eye, who in turn referred me to a retina specialist in St. Louis. So I traveled there, and between them, they decided there was nothing could be done for my left eye whatsoever. So I keep seeing Dr. Palmer. He said, finally one day, he said, this is healing pretty well. I want you to see a Dr. Klaus Dolman at Mass Eye and Ear in Boston for the possibility of a cornea transplant. And I said, okay, you know, whatever it takes. I mean, I just kind of belonged for the ride at that point. And I remember saying to him, Dr. Palmer, it turns out I have fantastic insurance. See, this was a workers' comp claim, although it was not directly related to my job. It happened at work. Excuse me. So I said, if there's somebody better, keep in mind that it was kind of relatively new to do cornea transplants at the time. They really didn't do them in Michigan. I said, if there's somebody better, it doesn't matter where they are, they're covering my travel. So his response was, Brian, if you were a member of my family, this is where I'd be sending you. And it was all he needed to say, and it was the best thing he could have said. So anyway, I go to Boston. This Dr. Dolman, who obviously was renowned for this cornea transplant work. I knew that because later trips we saw people there going to him or obviously from out of the country. And he examined me thoroughly. And a couple of other, he was head of ophthalmology at Harvard Med School, which I guess is a pretty good recommendation. Anyway, like I said, he was quite stern sounding, a little severe sounding, just even when I met him. And he examined my eyes thoroughly. And he said, I think we can do a transplant on that right eye. But then he pushed back from me. I'm sorry. this was what I wanted your family to hear. He said, quite sternly, he said, Brian, who did the initial surgery on that eye? And for a second, my heart was in my throat. I thought, what is he going to say? And I said, Dr. Palmer in Grand Rapids, near where I live. And he said, well, if he hadn't done such a good job, we'd have nothing to work with here.
Here, I got tissues.
What? I'm sorry. Some of these things that I remember like they were yesterday, and I kind of wish I could get through telling the people without this happening. But anyway,
No,
so this and that, he explained the risk and benefit parameters as doctors always do. And he said, obviously you have to wait for donor tissue. He said, do you want to fly home and think about this? I said, no. I'm 24 years old. I'm blind. Put me on the list. And so they did. And I went back to the hotel for several days and stayed there. I was there, I think it was 27 or 28 days total. So a couple days later, they had donor tissue. He did the surgery. It was successful as far as we knew. I stayed there and went back to cornea service daily after I was out of the hospital. Back then, they kept you in the hospital several days for anything. But they wanted me right there where they could keep checking it. And then I went back to the Holiday Inn, which was a couple blocks away, and went back every day at cornea service, and they examined me, and students would look at me. And one day he said, boy, you were in class at Harvard today or yesterday. We talked about your case and so on and so forth. And he'd have students, whatever they're called, ophthalmology students, come in and examine me. And so by the time I left Boston, I had a little sight. And I went back, I don't know, I had the surgery on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. And over the course of the summer, I flew back several times. I don't remember, it was once a month. And of course, I was seeing Dr. Palmer frequently in between, and he was checking me and checking my progress. And, with the big E, I don't know if you've ever seen the big E on an eye chart, and you just basically had to point at which way the legs of the E were facing. And so we could do other letters, and he showed me pictures on charts that he showed to little kids because I was getting the lines of letters memorized. He even had a little toy he would put out in front of me like this and move it around to see if my eye was, following it. And we had laughs about that. And
Oh, yeah, he had to change the eye chart or something because you'd walk back in and he'd just read it to the girl at the desk and he goes, am I good? No, get in there.
I don't know if you ever met Bonnie, who worked there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice gal, and obviously we got to know each other very well too. I doubt that your dad had a patient he ever spent more time with than he did with me. And I just wish we had gotten to know each other better outside of the doctor-patient relationship, because we got along very, very well. And except one day, I let it be known I wasn't putting my eye drops in 4 times a day. I was only doing it 3 times. And I could just see just well enough to see the back of his neck get red. He was at the And he goes, who told you to change that? And I said, nobody. And I told him, well, you have to do your medications the way you're told. So, yeah, we got past that. No. So, anyway, I started to drive a little. I had enough vision to do that. I'm not sure he really even knew that because I wasn't too sure if that, what the legal level was. And I started to work a little bit, although I only lived 3 miles from work. And long story short, I got to October. This is a year after the incident. And they wanted me back in Boston again for kind of a final post-op visit, I guess you'd call it. And I had the appointment. I knew what day it was and everything. And I told people, Mr. Robinette for one, who was very against it, that I wanted to drive to Boston. And I still kind of refer to this as my victory lap.
Huh.
So 3 or 4 people offered to go with me, most of whom I would not have wanted with me regardless for that long. I had to prove to myself. And I don't remember how many days it took me. The whole trip was like 3 weeks round trip. Drove through 11 states and a Canadian province. But I went back for my appointment. And walked in to Dr. Dolman again, to the exam chair. And because somebody had been with me there each time, I could tell he was kind of looking over my shoulder. And he said, oh, who came with you this time? And I said, no one. And he goes, you flew out by yourself? And I said, yeah, I've done that once. And I said, no, I drove out. And he just they did this where there was 3 of them in there and they just did these sideways, looked at each other like he drove out. And I almost kind of panicked for a minute because I thought, is he going to check my vision and say, you have no business driving anywhere, much less to Boston?
In Boston, let me tell you, it's dicey.
Yeah, it is. So
Boston is crazy.
anyway, did all the exams and everything and the pictures, and he said, well, we're very pleased with this. And they had checked my corrected vision at 20/30 in that eye.
Jeez.
Wow.
And no. I said, so you consider this a success, obviously. And he goes, considering the amount of damage that you received when you got hurt, this is one of the most successful transplants we have ever done.
Wow.
And then he stopped a minute and he goes, I have ever done. He goes, I want you to know I did the suturing myself on this. And it was a complicated one, they told me, because they actually had to do some trimming of scar tissue from my iris to get the new cornea to lay the way it was supposed to and everything. And so anyway, I don't want to drag this out too long. I took the rest of my trip. I left there. I can't even tell you how I felt, but I was going to tell you, one of the reasons the trip took so long was because I only drove in the daylight for 2 reasons. Still, there was a situation where headlights kind of bothered me and that kind of thing, where if I drove at dark, I'd catch myself looking off at the line on the side of the road, to not look at somebody's oncoming lights. So I just didn't do that. But the other thing was, I wanted to see everything. I stopped in every little scenic turnout and roadside park. So look around, you know. And this was a lot of area. I purposely stayed off the interstates because I wasn't in no hurry and I wanted to see everything. I didn't want to get there fast. So I went obviously out through Ontario, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, into Massachusetts. I made a little side trip up into Maine. So, and then when I left there, after what he said, I'm just like, oh, I'm not even sure I need the car. I could finish the rest of this trip on foot. I went out on Cape Cod. I went to New York City and gawked around. Like, I told my wife I could have had a sign on it that said Country Hick because I'm looking up all the time and I'm just having a great time. And I could never have been believed that I could have that good a trip on by myself, but I did. And of course, the first thing I did when I got back was go to see Dr. Palmer. This was very routine. And I got in there. And I would say he and I together were about as excited as we ever got. Strike me as a real excitable person, and of course I'm not, but we were very pleased. And I said to him, well, he said one thing that was kind of funny. I thought, he goes, Brian, before you go to cornea service when you're at these trips in Boston, he goes, do you maybe go somewhere and have a cocktail? And I said, no. I said, that's what I do afterwards. I said, why would you ask that? And he goes, well, because their pressure reading is always just a tidge lower than mine. And he goes, the shot of alcohol will do that. And I said, is that a prescription? And he goes, no. Get a good report. That's where I go after, is to go, you know, because there was like a Union Oyster House in Boston, and it's the oldest restaurant in the continental United States in continuous operation. And you can go there and sit at the bar where these people sat whose names we learned in school, you know. Daniel Webster would sit here and drink beer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden history was like coming alive to me. History that I just tolerated in high school was all of a sudden, like, you know.
Yeah.
And but anyway, to get back to the end of the trip and visiting Dr. Palmer, and he was so happy, and I was so happy. And I said, Doctor, didn't you think it would ever get this good? And he said, oh, we hoped, but no. So everything was great. And the thing that made me contact your mother was that now that I'm blind for the last several years and a little older, and even though I hope to be around for years to come, something happens when you get a certain age, apparently. You realize you have more of your life behind you than you probably do ahead of you. And you start to reflect on these things. And I just thought, I had 30 years of working, of traveling, of reading, of picking out an attractive wife.
Number 2.
Having as close to normal life as it was possible for me to have for 30 years because of Dr. Palmer and Dr. Dolman. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And, you know, because of a couple of other surgeons too, I had to have eardrums grafted in. They were absolutely gone. One leg was horribly injured, the other one not so bad, but they're very usable. Not attractive, but usable. Because of those doctors. And I said, this was as close as I got to expressing my appreciation, which I'm very sorry for. I said to Dr. Palmer one day, he goes, something about my condition and the things I was doing and everything. And I said, I was so lucky, so blessed that the doctors I had work on me right after I got hurt were there and were obviously as qualified as they were. And he just kind of chuckled and he said, Brian, none of us just happened to be there.
Called in on a
They got
Saturday
called
morning.
in. And I got what he was saying, you know, like kind of like saying, we're the best that were available. And I got that, you know, but I just meant that they were available. I knew they weren't just standing there waiting for an explosion victim to come in. In fact, I guess it was my sister said, she saw Dr. Palmer walk in one day and she goes, he had hush puppies on with paint spattered on them.
He was in the
And
house when
he
you
was
got
painting
hurt.
something at home when he got called in, and she goes, I kind of thought, oh, he's gonna operate on my brother.
Yeah.
But it could not have worked out better. And like I said, there's one other thing, and this goes back to like halfway through the story I just told you. Had the cornea transplant in March, so I'm saying this was like halfway between there and my victory lap in October. The kids, I'll call them, they were all younger than me, who set this explosion went on trial. And I happened to be in the hospital when they were arrested and the investigation went on, obviously. And Dave Sawyer, who was an assistant prosecutor in Kent County at the time, came up to the hospital. And I've always appreciated this because he knew me a little bit because he was graduated ahead of me at Rockford High School. And he came up and he said, I want to tell you something because you're going to hear what these kids are charged with and it has nothing to do with you. And he goes, you're probably going to wonder, well, you know, wasn't the fact that I was nearly killed and another gentleman could have been relevant? And he goes, we can't charge him with that because we can't show intent. And I kind of knew that. That's about the extent of my knowledge about the law. But he said, if we charge them with intent to do great bodily harm or kill you or anything, he goes, it's not going to fly. So the charge was something to do with setting a ultra hazardous explosive device for the purposes of property damage and so on. And I said, okay, whatever. You know, at the time, I was not at all concerned about them or what happened to them, to be honest. I was absorbed in myself. But when the trials came up that summer, I was called to testify, as was your father, as was Dr. Palmer, which made me mad because, well, obviously what he had to say was relevant. I'm like, this man has so much better things to do with his time than come into court and be questioned about how badly I was injured or how badly the other gentleman was injured.
And it was a federal case. It was
a
not,
federal case.
it was
yeah.
in the federal building in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, the Dynamite, it turns out, was stolen. And I didn't know this at the time, but later I found out that Gerald Ford was planning to visit to Grand Rapids. And the dynamite that went off at Robinette's was 2 sticks, and a case had been stolen. So they felt they had to find out where the rest of the explosive was.
Yeah.
Well, they ended up finding it under a freeway bridge of all the crazy places. These kids had obviously stowed it.
Oh, God.
But anyway, so they get Dr. Palmer on the stand. I don't even remember what they asked me, to be honest. But I remember the defense attorney talking to him, to Dr. Palmer. And of course, again, he was not loud. He was just, I don't know, what would you call it? Determined? Just soft spoken, but like very able to get his point across.
Mhm.
And, excuse me, he said, the defense attorney was trying to kind of minimize how badly we were hurt or how super dangerous this was or anything. And he said at one point, Dr. Palmer, you, I guess it was probably by deposition, said that you removed many fragments from Brian and his face and eyes and so forth when you originally saw him. He goes, excuse me, he goes, what was the number? He goes, was it 10? Was it 20? Maybe 100? Like, you know, this would be the most extreme case. And Dr. Palmer just kind of gritted his teeth and said, hundreds. That was the end of that line of questioning.
Oh, man.
Because it wasn't going where he wanted it to go. But anyway, again, I don't even know how much time they spent in jail, or I really didn't care. You know, I'm not a vindictive person. I didn't want to go over and choke them or anything. But outside the courtroom, there were several ATF agents. You know what ATF is?
Yep.
Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and they investigate
Explosives.
that type of thing. And the senior agent stepped over to me and he goes, Brian, I think there's something you should know. And I said, okay, tell me. And he goes, we investigated this explosion thoroughly to the point of replicating that bomb, excuse me, and detonating it out in a field, analyzing what was in it based on the debris at the scene, blah, blah, blah. He goes, I've done this for 23 years. It's what I do. And he goes, I just wanted you to know that there's no reasonable explanation why you lived through that. He goes, typically, anybody that close to a dynamite explosion, their lungs would rupture. And there's not just collapse, but rupture, and there's no saving. And I said, well, thank you for telling me that. I guess
Buy a
I
lottery
did.
ticket now.
Like I told a couple of my friends, I say that changes your attitude about life in a way I can't put my finger on. I don't know, I guess I got to give it to God. I don't know what else to say.
You're
It wasn't like I was the toughest guy around or anything like that. It just was very blessed that I had, and again, like I said, I now know, like, well, now we're 45 years out or more. I not only have had all this time, I had 30 years of it with vision. And again, that's why I called Marion. I just wanted to tell her what Dr. Dolman had said in Boston about your dad's work, about Dr. Palmer's work. I wish I had told him, but he knew he was good at what he did. He was good. not only intelligent, but highly skilled, obviously. And I guess that's all I have to say. I just wanted you to know that. And if you want to look up more details, like I said, the archives of the Grand Rapids Press would have them. There were several articles in about me. But should have been articles in about him. All I did was, like I said, I was along for the ride. So the last time I saw your dad was at Dr. David Verdier's office, who was the ophthalmologist that Dr. Palmer turned me over to. I don't remember the time gap in between there, but he was actually there as a patient and he was not well. I can't tell you
I think that's when after he diagnosed himself.
what year it was, but we just kind of chance meeting in the hall there and spoke for maybe 20 seconds. And then he was getting called in for his appointment. And that was the last time I saw him. And I'm just, he was only 10 years older than me. We figured that out one day.
He was a young man with surgery. I'm like, oh my God, he was 36 years old. And I think about that now. And I'm like going, oh my God, I have a 36-year-old kid working on me. And I'm like, damn.
So I just wanted to express that to all of you. I know it's not, it doesn't help you at all, but hopefully it does in a way. And if this is, if this becomes a bestseller, then I hope you cut me on. That's all I'm telling you. It was great to talk to Marion. We didn't talk long. I just gave her a very abbreviated version of this because I didn't want you people to think, oh my gosh, this guy's gonna rattle on forever. And I could, but so much of it was just a blur. But like I said, a lot of the things I just have been lost in time. But some of these things, like what he said to me, what Dr. Dolman said about him and his work, it's like it was yesterday. I can't believe that the way my memory is at times, that I can remember it that well, but obviously significant things stick in your mind.
Yeah.
That was significant.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes,
that
thank you so much.
incredible story. And
Okay.
I enjoyed listening to your journey, as wrenching as it was.
And
But-
Brian, there are 3 grandchildren right here watching right now who
Okay.
never got to meet their grandpa.
Oh,
And another one who did, but she doesn't necessarily remember much. So for you to share this alone for them is huge.
well, I hope so. I wish that in my entire life since then, like I said, I did a lot of things after I got my sight back. I wish I could point to anyone that was as significant as what he did, not just for me, but I'm sure for a lot of people. I was the biggest mess he ever worked on, but obviously worked on a lot of people whose eyesight was on the line. Oh, that's one other thing I was going to throw in. And of course, if you have questions for me, that's fine. The last time I saw Dr. Dolman, he, again, being a little abrupt, he just got his examination done and he walked out. And I walked out and I said to the nurse, where did Dr. Dolman go? She goes, well, he's right in that other exam room. And I said, I want to say something to him. And again, this is more the type of thing I wish I had said to Dr. Palmer, but it was more an ongoing relationship. So I didn't feel like with Dr. Dolman, I thought I might never see this man again. So anyway, I walked in where he was and I said, I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. Because I said, I know something about eyes that you don't know. And he kind of bristled a little bit. Like, there's a world-renowned ophthalmologist surgeon. And he goes, well, what's that? And I said, what it's like to do without him.
Yeah.
And he said, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Because that's, the crux of the whole thing is like, I've had 2 episodes with that now, and I doubt that I'll ever see again. In fact, almost the thought of getting my sight back now is a little scary in an odd way. I know that probably doesn't make any sense, but we had a 50th high school class reunion a couple years ago. And when we got to talking, and people talked about everything I had been through, and I said, hey, I'm the luckiest one here. And they're like, oh, really? And I said, yeah. I said, I can go in the bathroom in the morning, look in the mirror and see whatever I want to see.
And I was in high school,
I can see 24-year-old Brian,
Oh.
and it was a joke, obviously, but then you have your visualization of things, and I'd probably be shocked at how things have changed, but anyway, including me, but yeah, like I said, at this age and blind, I just start to reflect on how blessed I was to have that 30 years. That's all I can tell you.
Well, it's wonderful. This is Chris. I'm his youngest son. So I was born in 1977. But it's really neat hearing your observations of my dad, because we knew him in a very different capacity, right? His measured approach with you in the office was mostly mirrored during our entire lives growing up with him as a parent, and that softened a fair amount after we became older, adults.
Right.
And but hearing some of the way you present things he said to you, or what he said in the court, or the pink shoes,
Yes.
he passed in 2004, in August of 2004, and we have a family cottage where we all get together, and there's a standing coat rack in one of the main rooms at that cottage, that we have one of his old pairs of shoes covered in paint, because goes on and go off, and he'd be staining something or painting something up at the cottage, and one of his pairs of pants, his many pairs of jeans that were again covered in paint droppings and full of stitched up patches. And so we've got a small homage to who he was, and it's neat, because as my wife was saying, the grandkids here listening didn't ever meet him.
Right.
But we never really knew him in the capacity that he served so many in surgery and helping ophthalmologic patients. So it is you can't see my mother reacting to you tell the story, but it's.
Well, he did say he was a specialist when Brian asked him about what happened.
Well, yes, after you were born, I don't know if Bunny told me or what, but Dr. Palmer and his wife had a baby son. And so when I went in that day, I said, excuse me if I'm wrong, but aren't your other 3 kids also boys? And he said, well, Brian, I am a specialist. It was just the,
Deadpan.
we didn't
Yeah.
spend a lot of time laughing together, but a lot of things like that were said. But just what I appreciated was his quiet confidence. Like I said, he would all of a sudden be at my bedside at Blodgett, and I didn't hear him coming in. I guess that was the hush puppies. All of a sudden, just have his hand on mine and say, Brian, it's Dr. Palmer. And a couple times I had to tell him to speak up a little bit because he kind of forgot that I didn't have
Working.
eardrums at the time. Took 2 surgeries to get those back in. But anyway, just when he say things like, we're not, it was just helped me so much through that time.
I promise you, you've expressed some regret for not saying anything to him while he was alive, but you didn't need to. I promise you, he could see in your eye and in your expression your appreciation. You didn't need to say anything.
The other thing I would say,
Just, I just wish I had more, but I hope you're right that he knew the respect that I had for him, and not just as a doctor, but as a person. That's all. He was very determined, I would say. Never gave up on me.
this is Marion, and what I want you to hear is that you were a very special person to him. And now I understand why. Because you and he have very similar sense of humor, low-key approach, trusting, but wise. And it's a joy to hear the whole story. I heard only bits and pieces.
Sure.
But when he came back from surgery that day, he said, Marion, it was like trying to stitch together pieces of tissue paper.
Oh, wow.
Well, how many hours he was in surgery?
Oh.
Long time.
Okay.
And he said it was like there was a one spot and fireworks from there.
Mhm.
So pieces of tissue paper. So he then, you probably know, went on to learn to perfect glaucoma surgery with a new way of doing it. And because he was so concerned with people, Black people and Asians who were scarring over from the surgery,
Right.
he figured out how to take care of that problem. So he just was always concerned about his patients and working to try to get things better, coming up with ways of doing things that were different. And you were very special. You just have to know that. He didn't have to tell you, and you didn't have to tell him. You lived it. Thank you for telling us the story.
That means a lot to me.
Yeah, this was quite a gift. Thank you so much.
I love hearing about your victory lap.
Yes.
I think that's just fantastic. I love that you had people who wanted to join you and you wouldn't let them.
I don't think Dr. Palmer knew that I drove out there until I got back. And he was very pleased with that. But
He's
I was a
perfect.
little iffy about telling too many people what I was gonna do. I'm so glad I did. What a memory. I mean, that just, and to hear basically both the doctors say, this turned out the best it possibly could have. And, but the thing that I wanted Marion to know was what Dr. Dolman had said about, and that's rung through my head so many times that if he, and they didn't know each other, they knew of each other, but for him to say, if he hadn't done the job he did, we'd have nothing to work with here. And I've never forgotten that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Because he clearly wasn't, Dr. Dolman, and says, wasn't a man to just compliment somebody for no reason. I don't think that was in his personality. So,
Brian, you've given us an incredible gift. Thank you for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
well, I hope to meet some of you someday. So
Absolutely.
we'll see.
We're still running the berry farm, so if you
Oh,
ever
yeah.
want to pick raspberries, you can
The-
come.
Oh,
see
where is your farm?
The two old boys were there with Dr. Palmer in probably maybe 80, 81. I don't know, because he actually brought them out and because he knew I was starting this up and we grew raspberries and every once in a while he'd ask me, well, how are the blueberries doing? Hey, that he doesn't remember. He has a few other things on his mind, the difference between blueberries and raspberries. And he came out and like I said, I'm sure two of the boys that would have been the two older ones were with him because I didn't have the property until 79. So anyway, I don't.
It's Trapp's Berry Farm. It's on Facebook, so.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
What city?
Out that way.
Is it in Rockford?
Yes, it's in Rockford. Yep, east of Rockford. So, yeah.
Oh,
Well, we know where that is.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll have to come find you when this pandemic thing maybe lightens up a little bit.
I hope it's over soon.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
So, well, it's been very good to talk to you. I appreciate your time. And it's just so wonderful to tell somebody this story that really cares, you know. I mean, people care, but they have misconceptions about it. Like I said, that, oh, I was somehow working with dynamite or I had some involvement in the explosion, and that's something I've tried very hard to dispel because it was total coincidence that I was there. I mean, or that the explosives were there where I worked. And I always was thankful for that too, because I would hate to think anybody wanted that badly to injure me.
That's-
Well, she has a few times, but it's totally after that.
Oh, bless you.
Okay, well, you have contact information. If you have any questions or want to talk to me ever, that's fine.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate.
Thank you so much.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you,
care.
Kathy.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.